You know how they say the devil doesn't come with horns, but with everything you've ever wanted? I never believed it until my husband's brother came to stay. My life changed in the span of a single movie night, and I swear, if you knew what was coming, you'd be as breathless as I am right now. Before I tell you everything, make sure you subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because you are not going to want to miss what happens next. The house was always so empty when Mark was away, which was, always, just a cavern of silence and my own lonely reflection in the dark windows. That night, Liam found me in the kitchen, staring into a cold cup of tea. He'd been staying in our guest room for a week, a quiet presence that was somehow louder than the silence. He just stood in the doorway, not saying a word at first, and my heart did this stupid little flip. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "You look like you're a million miles away, Alara." It wasn't what he said, but how he said it. His eyes weren't just looking at me. They were looking into me, seeing the cracks in the perfect wife facade I worked so hard to maintain. In that moment, the air grew thick, electric. He saw me, and God help me, it was the most dangerous feeling in the world. The next few days were a special kind of torture because Mark came home. He breezed in from his business trip, filling the house with his loud phone calls and the scent of airport coffee, completely oblivious to the silent, crackling wire stretched between me and his brother. We were all forced to play happy family, and the performance was killing me. At dinner, the tension was so thick I could have choked on it. Mark would be rambling on about quarterly reports, and my entire nervous system was focused on Liam, sitting directly across from me. He asked me to pass the salt, and when I handed it to him, our fingers brushed. It was nothing, a split second of contact, but a jolt, hot and sharp, shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back like I'd been burned, my breath catching in my throat. I risked a glance at him, and his eyes were dark, fixed on mine, a tiny, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. He knew exactly what that touch did to me. My heart hammered against my ribs, convinced Mark must hear it, must see the flush creeping up my neck. But my husband just kept talking, gesturing with his fork, lost in his own world. Later, as I was loading the dishwasher, I felt it again. That feeling of being watched. I looked at the dark reflection in the kitchen window and saw him, leaning against the doorframe, just observing me. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't doing anything, but the intensity in his gaze felt like a physical touch, pinning me in place. It was a dangerous game of glances and near misses, of shared silence in a crowded room. Every moment was a risk, every shared look a secret betrayal happening in plain sight. And the worst part? The guilt was exhilarating. It made me feel more alive than I had in years. That night, the inevitable happened. Mark, exhausted from his trip, mumbled a good night and went to bed early, leaving the three of us, me, Liam, and the suffocating silence, in the living room. The air immediately shifted, the pretense dropping away. It was just us. To break the quiet, Liam suggested a movie. It felt like a flimsy excuse, a way to be near each other without having to talk. I agreed, my voice barely a whisper. We sat on opposite ends of the enormous sofa, a chasm of gray cushions between us that felt both like a safe zone and a challenge. The movie started, some atmospheric thriller with quiet, mumbled dialogue. A few minutes in, Liam shifted. He leaned towards me, his voice a low rumble that vibrated right through me. "I can barely hear it," he said, and I could feel the warmth of his breath even from a few feet away. My eyes were glued to the screen, but I wasn't seeing any of it. Then he said the words that changed everything. "Come closer, so I can hear better." It wasn't a question, it was a command wrapped in a polite request. Every rational part of my brain screamed no, screamed to get up and go to bed. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I found myself sliding across the fabric, the soft shush of the cushion the only sound in the room. I stopped when my thigh was just an inch from his. The heat coming off his body was overwhelming. The clean, spicy scent of his soap filled my lungs. The movie was just noise now, My entire universe had shrunk to the space between us. I could feel his heartbeat, or maybe it was mine, a frantic, powerful rhythm that seemed to be shaking the very frame of the couch. It was wild, uncontrolled, and it was a perfect mirror of my own. He knew. God, he knew. Slowly, his arm moved, resting on the back of the sofa behind me, not touching me, but caging me in. My breath hitched. I finally forced myself to look at him, and in the flickering light from the TV, his eyes met mine. There was no more guessing. It was all there, the want, the risk, the confession. We hadn't said a word, but we had just admitted everything. His arm behind me wasn't a comfort. It was a cage, and I had no desire to be set free. The movie was a distant, meaningless hum, the actors just ghosts on a screen. My entire world had collapsed into the few inches of space between our bodies on that couch. I could feel the heat radiating from his thigh, a warmth that seeped through my jeans and spread through me like a fever. I was hyper-aware of everything, the subtle scent of his soap, the way the flickering light from the television carved shadows across his jaw, the almost imperceptible tremor in his hand resting on the cushion behind me. My own heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a wild, panicked rhythm that felt loud enough to shake the room. Then I felt it, a low, thrumming vibration that traveled through the sofa cushions, a bass line to my own frantic beat. It was his heartbeat, just as fast, just as out of control. In that shared, silent chaos, the last of my defenses crumbled into dust. He wasn't just a temptation. He was a mirror of my own secret, desperate longing. Slowly, he turned his head, and the pretense of watching the movie was gone. His eyes, dark and intense, locked onto mine. There was no question in them, only a raw, dangerous certainty. He was going to break the rules, and he knew I was going to let him. His voice was a ghost of a sound, a whisper that was meant only for me, even in the empty house. Ilara. Just my name. But the way he said it, it wasn't the name my husband used. It was something else entirely, something possessive and real. It was the name of the woman he saw, the one hiding behind the tired wife. A sob caught in my throat, a mixture of terror and relief. Liam, we can't, I breathed, the words feeling flimsy and false on my tongue. It was the protest of a drowning woman refusing a life raft. He didn't argue. He didn't try to convince me. He just held my gaze and whispered back, I know. 2 words. That was all it took. An admission of guilt. A shared secret brought into the light. He knew it was wrong, and he didn't care, and neither did I. He began to move, the slowest, most deliberate motion I had ever witnessed. He shifted his body to face me fully, the space between us shrinking from inches to nothing. His knee brushed against mine, and a bolt of pure electricity shot through me, hot and sharp. His gaze dropped from my eyes to my mouth, and I instinctively parted my lips. My breathing hitched. This was it, the point of no return. He leaned in, and the world dissolved into a blur of color and light. There was only the scent of his skin, the heat of his body, and the agonizing, beautiful space between his lips and mine. A millimeter, less. The warmth of his breath was on my skin, a promise of the fire to come. I closed my eyes, ready for the impact, ready for the betrayal, ready for everything to burn. And then, a sound. A single, sharp creak of a floorboard from the hallway upstairs. Mark. My eyes flew open. We sprang apart like we'd been electrocuted, scrambling to opposite ends of the sofa in a single, panicked motion. The air, once thick and heavy with desire, was now sharp and thin with the iciness of pure fear. My heart was no longer just beating fast. It was trying to claw its way out of my chest. The movie was still playing, oblivious. The house was still quiet. There were no more footsteps, just the deafening silence of what had almost happened. I risked a glance at Liam. He was staring straight ahead at the screen, his jaw tight, his knuckles white where he gripped the cushion. But he wasn't watching the film. His chest was rising and falling in ragged breaths that matched my own. We had pulled back, but the line had been crossed anyway. We both knew it. The question was no longer if it would happen, but when and who would be there to see it when it did. We didn't speak after that. There was nothing to say. I mumbled a good night that sounded like a lie and fled to my room, my legs shaking. I closed the door and leaned against it, my entire body humming with a terrifying combination of adrenaline and raw, unspent desire. Sleep was impossible. I lay in the dark next to the gentle, rhythmic breathing of my husband and felt like a complete stranger in my own skin. The silence of the house was different now. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. Every creak of the old house was a footstep. Every whisper of the wind was my name on his lips. I squeezed my eyes shut, but all I could see was his face in the flickering TV light, the promise in his eyes. It was hours later, when the moon was high and the house was deep in its slumber, that my door handle turned with an almost imperceptible click. I didn't even flinch. I knew it was him. I had been waiting. He slipped into the room, a darker shadow in the darkness, and closed the door behind him without a sound. He didn't come to the bed. He just stood there, and I could feel his gaze on me, a physical weight in the oppressive quiet. I slid out from under the covers, my bare feet cold on the hardwood floor, and met him in the middle of the room. There were no words. Words were for the life we had before tonight. This was something else. His hands found my waist, his fingers digging into my hips, and it wasn't a gentle touch. It was an anchor. He pulled me against him, and the last bit of air left my lungs in a ragged gasp. This was not a kiss. It was a collision. It was years of stolen glances, of unspoken thoughts, of forbidden warmth finally finding a voice. It was messy and desperate, a frantic, searching exploration of lips and teeth and skin. His mouth tasted of want, and I was starving. Every touch was a confession, every caress a betrayal. We were a fire that had been smoldering for years, and the slightest breath of oxygen had just turned us into an inferno. It was reckless and wrong, and it felt more honest than anything I had felt in my entire marriage. We were sitting in the dark, just feet away from my husband, and God help me, the danger was the most intoxicating part of it all. The dawn came like an accusation, a sliver of pale, unforgiving light slicing through the gap in the curtains. The fever broke, and a chilling clarity washed over me. I was in the guest room, tangled in sheets that smelled like him, my head on his chest, listening to the steady, slowing beat of his heart. The sound that had been a wild drum mirroring my own just hours ago now sounded like a ticking clock, counting down the seconds to my ruin. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I slipped out of his bed, grabbing my clothes from the floor, my movements clumsy and loud in the sudden silence. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. Fleeing back to my own bedroom felt like the longest walk of my life. The air in the hallway was thick with my guilt. My own bed felt alien, the space beside Mark a cold, empty indictment of what I had done. When morning came for real, the pretense was suffocating. I found Mark in the kitchen, humming as he made coffee, completely oblivious. He kissed my cheek, and it felt like a brand. "Morning, sleepyhead," he said cheerfully. I could barely manage a smile. Then Liam walked in. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second, and in that moment, the entire world tilted. It was all there, the shared secret, the shame, the raw memory of the night. We looked away instantly, like two criminals at the scene of the crime. The air crackled. The simple act of pouring milk into my coffee felt like a monumental task, my hands shaking. Mark was rambling about a conference call, but his voice was just a drone in the background. My entire consciousness was focused on Liam, who was leaning against the counter, staring into his mug as if it held the answers to the universe. Mark finally paused, taking a sip of his coffee. He looked between me and his brother, a small, easy smile on his face. "Wow," he said, chuckling. "It's quiet in here this morning. You two sleep okay?" The question hung in the air, a perfectly innocent grenade. I froze, my spoon clattering against my mug. I could feel Liam's gaze on me, waiting, and I didn't dare look up because I knew if I did, the guilt written all over my face would burn our entire world to the ground. My throat closed up. The sound of my spoon hitting the ceramic was like a gunshot in the silent kitchen. I couldn't breathe. I could feel Liam's eyes on me, boring into the side of my head, but all I could do was stare down into the swirling vortex of my coffee. Mark's question was a landmine, and I was standing right on top of it. A laugh, thin and brittle, escaped my lips. "Slept like a rock," I lied, forcing my eyes up to meet my husband's. "You must have been exhausted." It was a weak deflection, but it was all I had. Mark just nodded, buying it completely, already lost again in his thoughts about work. The crisis was averted, but the cold sweat on the back of my neck told me everything. That morning, we made a silent pact. Liam and I. It was in the way we avoided each other's gaze, the careful, calculated distance we kept between us in the hallway. The message was clear. It was a mistake. A beautiful, earth-shattering mistake that could never, ever happen again. We had to be normal. We had to be brother-in-law and sister-in-law. For the next 2 days, we were ghosts to each other, polite strangers sharing a house. The effort was physically painful. It felt like holding my breath underwater. The air in the house, once electric, was now thick with restraint, a heavy, suffocating blanket of everything we weren't saying, everything we weren't doing. But you can only hold your breath for so long. It happened on a Tuesday. Mark was locked in his home office on an international call that would last for hours. I was in the kitchen, trying to lose myself in the rhythm of chopping vegetables for dinner, when Liam walked in to get a glass of water. We didn't speak. The silence was louder than any conversation. I was acutely aware of him standing by the sink, of the sound of him drinking, of the way his shadow fell across the floor, almost touching my feet. When he was done, he didn't leave. He just stood there, leaning against the counter, watching me. The simple sound of my knife hitting the cutting board became the only rhythm in the world. Thump, thump, thump. It was the beat of my own terrified heart. "Ilara," he said, his voice quiet, rough. I didn't look up. "Don't," I whispered, my knuckles white on the handle of the knife. I felt him move, felt the air shift as he closed the distance between us. He came up behind me, so close I could feel the heat of his body through my sweater. He didn't touch me. He didn't have to. "I can't stop thinking about it," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. A shiver racked my entire body. My resolve, which I thought was made of steel, shattered into a million pieces. The knife fell from my hand, clattering onto the counter. I turned, and it was like a dam breaking. He crushed his mouth to mine, and it wasn't a kiss, it was a drowning. His hands were in my hair, on my waist, pulling me tight against him, and I was clawing at his shirt, trying to get closer. It was desperate and frantic, a starved thing finally being fed. We were right there, in the middle of the kitchen, with my husband just down the hall, his voice a faint drone through the office door. The danger, the sheer stupid risk of it, was a drug, and I was hopelessly addicted. We were playing with fire in a house made of gasoline, and all I wanted was to watch it burn. That kiss in the kitchen changed the rules of the game. Before, it was a secret we were trying to bury. Now, it was a secret we were trying to keep alive. The attempt to stay away was a failure, a joke. The magnetic pull between us was no longer something to fight. It was a current to navigate. Our house, my home, became a labyrinth of stolen moments and near misses. A touch in the hallway as we passed, disguised as an accident. His hand covering mine for a second too long as I passed him the remote. Our feet brushing under the table at dinner while Mark talked about his portfolio. Each tiny transgression was a spark, a jolt of adrenaline that made me feel more alive than I had in a decade. We got bolder. The risks we took became more reckless, more insane. One afternoon, while Mark was mowing the lawn, the roar of the engine a perfect cover, Liam cornered me in the laundry room. He pressed me against the warm, vibrating machine and kissed me until my knees went weak, until the clean scent of detergent was replaced by the intoxicating scent of him. We were becoming careless, drunk, on the thrill of almost getting caught. The near miss that should have stopped us only made us worse. I had been in the guest room, in his bed, just for a few stolen minutes while he showered. It was stupid, I know. I just wanted to lie where he slept. I left just as I heard the water shut off, my heart pounding. Later that evening, the three of us were in the living room when Mark stood up to stretch. "Huh, that's weird," he said, walking over to the fireplace mantel. He picked something up, holding it between his thumb and forefinger. It was my earring, a small silver hoop, the one I thought I'd lost last week. "How did this get in here?" he asked, turning to me. My blood ran cold. I knew exactly how it got there. It must have fallen off when I was in Liam's room, and he, in a panic, must have found it and just put it on the nearest surface outside the room to hide it. I stared at the earring in my husband's hand, a tiny, gleaming piece of evidence that could detonate our lives. Liam was perfectly still on the couch, his face a mask of stone. I could feel his panic screaming across the room. I forced a laugh. "Oh my God, I've been looking for that everywhere. It must have fallen off my coat when I brought the extra blankets to his room the other day." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, it scared me. Mark just shrugged, handed it to me, and the moment passed. But I was shaking. I looked in the mirror that night, and I didn't know the woman looking back. Her eyes were bright with secrets, her smile a little too sharp. Who was she? She was a liar. A cheat. She was a woman who was risking everything for a fire that was bound to consume her. I was trapped in this beautiful, terrifying maze with him, and the truth was, I wasn't even looking for the way out anymore. I just wanted to see how far we could go before the walls came crashing down. The lie about the earring should have been a warning shot, a terrifying glimpse of the cliff's edge. Instead, we treated it like a victory. For a few days, a strange, toxic confidence settled over us. We had gotten away with it. The adrenaline from the near miss fueled an even deeper recklessness. But the universe has a way of balancing the books, and my reckoning came on a perfectly ordinary Thursday evening. Mark had been home for a week straight, a new record, and he was trying. I have to give him that. He was making an effort to be present, to put his phone away at dinner. That night, he came into the living room where I was pretending to read. Liam was on the far side of the room pretending to check emails on his laptop, and the air was thick with the usual silent hum of our secret. Mark didn't have a phone in his hand. He had a dusty, leather-bound photo album. My heart dropped. It was our wedding album. He sat down next to me on the couch, the space Liam usually occupied, and opened it on my lap. "Remember this?" he asked, his voice soft, nostalgic. He pointed to a picture of us, impossibly young, laughing as we fumbled with cutting the cake. He smelled like his familiar aftershave, a scent I hadn't truly noticed in years. He started turning the pages, narrating our life together. The awkward first apartment, the vacation to the coast, the day we brought our dog home. He wasn't the loud, distracted businessman. He was just Mark, my husband, the man whose hand I was holding in every single picture. And with every page he turned, I felt a piece of myself dying. I was a ghost at my own funeral. I smiled, I nodded, I even laughed when he pointed out his terrible haircut in one photo, but inside, a monster was uncoiling in my gut. Guilt. It wasn't the exhilarating, dangerous guilt that had fueled the affair. This was a heavy, suffocating poison. I risked a glance at Liam. He had stopped typing. His laptop was dark. He was just watching us, his face completely unreadable, a statue carved from granite. He was seeing it too. The history, the life I was setting on fire. Mark closed the album, his hand resting on top of it, covering mine. "I know I've been away a lot, Alara," he said, his eyes searching mine. "I've been so focused on building a future that I forgot to live in the present. I want to fix that. I want to go back to this." He tapped the smiling couple on the cover. "I miss this. I miss you." A single hot tear escaped and rolled down my cheek. He mistook it for a tear of happiness. He wiped it away gently with his thumb, a gesture so tender it felt like a physical blow. I felt vile. I was a monster. This man was talking about saving our marriage while I was sleeping with his brother down the hall. The weight of it all, the lies, the risks, the sheer catastrophic selfishness of my actions crashed down on me at once. I couldn't breathe. I mumbled something about needing some water and fled to the kitchen, leaning over the sink, gasping for air as if I'd just been pulled from wreckage. This wasn't a game. It wasn't a thrilling escape. It was a demolition. And I was holding the detonator. I looked at my reflection in the dark window, and the woman staring back was a stranger, her eyes wide with a terror that was finally, horribly real. This couldn't last. It was going to end, and it was going to end badly, and it was going to destroy the kind, unsuspecting man in the other room who was still holding onto a photograph of a woman who no longer existed.